Hey there, I'm Roxanne with Baker's Acres Homestead, and today I am making some kombucha. And I've had a couple people ask me if I could do a video of my process, so I thought I would share my process with you guys today. So I've got one batch already made, and I thought I would show you guys my next batch that I do. So usually what I do first is I'll get my tea going over here on the stove, and what you want for that is 4 cups of water and a cup of sugar, and we use pure cane sugar for that. And you boil that, and then you'll put 2 tablespoons of black tea into that, and let it steep for about 10 to 15 minutes. And I know some people use green tea too. You can use green tea, and I've actually done that before, and it turned out fairly well too. So 4 cups of water, a cup of sugar, and you let that boil. And then once it gets to boiling, you turn it off, and then put your 2 tablespoons of black tea into that and let it steep for 15 minutes. And then while that is going, I will usually make my flavorings that I want to flavor my kombuchas with. So what happens is when you make kombucha, you have a first fermentation and a second fermentation. And the first fermentation, you have to have your SCOBY, which is a symbiotic colony of bacteria and yeast. So it's bacteria and yeast that are working together. They like eat on the sugars and stuff that's in the tea, and ferments your tea, which makes the kombucha. And so you need a SCOBY, and usually about a cup to 2 cups of starter tea, which starter tea comes from a batch of already made kombucha. You just take out a cup or 2 out of your batch of kombucha before you make your next batch to add to your next batch of tea. When you put your SCOBY in, you add the starter tea with it too, and that helps the fermentation process to start in that new batch of tea. So you take your SCOBY and your starter tea and your black tea that you made on the stove. So you will take, what I do is I make in gallons. So like here is 1 gallon that's already made. And how I make that is I will put 14 cups of water into my container, into my jar, and then I'll pour in my 4 cups of black tea, and then I will put my 1 to 2 cups of starter tea in that, and then my SCOBY. And then before you put your SCOBY and your starter tea in, you actually want to check the temperature of your water, because it needs to be between 65 and 85 degrees, or it could kill your SCOBY, which you don't want that to happen, because then nothing will happen in your tea other than it going bad. But I have this handy dandy thermometer that I use. I just stick down in my water and black tea mixture before I add the SCOBY and starter tea, and just test it, make sure that it's at the right temperature before adding it in. And then once I add that into that, then it's ready to go into the cabinet, or wherever you prefer to put it. It needs to be in a dark place at room temperature. And So that's how I get my batch going. Now, when I'm ready to make a new batch, that's the first fermentation. Oh, I forgot to add the first fermentation after you make your batch and you put it into your cabinet or on your counter in a dark spot or wherever you're going to keep it. You need to let it ferment for 7 to 10 days. That is about the average and about the that's a good range to go by. I know some people go a little less, some people may go a little more. You don't want to go too much less than that or too much more than that, though, because it could mess up the fermentation process. But that's a good range to go by, about 7 to 10 days. But really, it depends on your taste and your preference for how you like your kombucha. Okay, so that is the first fermentation. And then once that is done, then you're ready for your second fermentation. And your second fermentation is just adding in your flavor and letting it ferment a little bit more longer, eating on the sugars from your flavor that you add. So, and it makes it a little more fizzier, like carbonated, from eating on the sugars and just the processing and reactions that are happening in that. And so that's where I'm at now, is the second fermentation part. And I've got one batch already done here that I've filled with the first fermentation of kombucha. And this, I just did date nectar. I'm trying experimenting with a new recipe to see how it turns out. I'm trying to make it like a cream soda type flavor, and I know some people that use dates to make that flavor. You could also use brown sugar and vanilla too, but I want to try with the dates and see how that goes. So I just put about 2 tablespoons per each jar of date nectar, and then fill the rest up with my first fermentation of kombucha. And then the other jars, they have a mixture of different fruits, mango, banana, apples, pineapples, I believe, and then some frozen kale. And so I bye baby. My daughter's over there. She's going outside to play. And then I like to use frozen fruit a lot, just because I find that it works a little better for me and comes out a little better. So I'll just take the frozen fruit and put it in my blender with some water and blend it up until it's a puree. And then I will put about 1/4 cup into each jar or each bottle of that. And you can really use any fruit that you want to for that. And it always turns out really good for me. And so, like I said, you take frozen fruit and you just put it in your blender with some water and blend it up so that it's all pureed and like a liquid. And then you put 1/4 cup into each bottle. You can also use whole fruits, fresh fruits, and you could just cut them up into pieces and put them inside your jar. You could juice them and use the juice and put it inside your jar. And you can add other stuff to it too. Like I've done different fruits with basil. I've done watermelon and mint. I've added in hibiscus with it before. So I mean, it's really your preference and your taste and how you want to flavor it. And I mean, just experiment, really. There's some that haven't turned out so great and that we didn't like, and so we don't you know, we don't make those anymore. But it's really, it's fun to experiment and figure out, you know, what you like, and how you like it, and, you know, different flavors. Just play around with it a little bit. But you do have to have some kind of sugar, though, for your second fermentation, because that the yeast and stuff in your kombucha needs to eat off of the sugar to be able to ferment it. So you do need some kind of sugar in there to feed it. But so once you've got your second fermentation ready, then you put those bottles back into your dark spot, whether that's on the counter somewhere or in a cabinet or wherever you're going to keep it. You put those back, and then you let those sit for about 3 to 5 days before they're ready, and then you will put them in the refrigerator. And putting them in the refrigerator stops the fermentation process, because you're chilling it and getting it cold, so it kills the yeast. It kills it because, like I said, when you're doing your first fermentation, you want it between 65 and 85 degrees. So when you put it into the refrigerator, it drops it way below that, and so that's what stops the fermentation process. And then you're ready to drink it, and it's very yummy and very good for you as well. It's got a lot of good probiotics and really good for gut health and everything. So good bacteria. That's really great for you. So not only is it a tasty drink, it's also a good health benefit, and really good for you. Okay, so let's get started on this next batch. So what I'm going to do first is take my cover off, and you want some kind of cloth cover on top. That way it can breathe, because your kombucha does need to breathe while it's fermenting. It needs to be able to let the air out of it, or it can build too much pressure and combust. So you need some kind of fabric covering over the top to be able to let that kombucha breathe. You don't want something with too big of holes, though, that dirt or bugs or whatever can get inside. So first, I take that off, and then I always have a container that I can take my SCOBY out. So this is your SCOBY. This is what it looks like. It's like a jellyfish kind of type consistency. It's really slimy and really like jello-y like. And so I stick that into my container like that, and then I will take, I usually do about 2 cups out of here. So do 1, and then 2, and then I put it in that container, and then I will put the lid on it, just so nothing gets in that while I am filling my jars here. And then I take a funnel, because that makes it easier to get your liquid into your jars without making a big mess. And then I just use the same cup to scoop kombucha out of my gallon jar. And then I will just start pouring it in and filling these jars. And you want to leave a little bit of head space in your jars. I would say about an inch or so of head space, because during the second fermentation it does build pressure, and you've got a cap screwed on there, so you don't want it too full that it's gonna build too much pressure that it pops your lid off or busts your jars or your bottles. So I will just keep filling these jars up until I reach the end of this kombucha. And I do 3 batches every time because we all like to drink it. And we all drink it every day. So we have to have quite a bit of kombucha for all of us. So I do 3-gallon batches of this kombucha every time I make it, and I make it once a week. And I've found that a gallon usually makes me about 7 to 8 jars of kombucha. And so that'll usually be about 21 bottles that I'll put out on my table for all 3 batches. Okay, and now that is empty. So that was my first fermentation that I put in my bottles with my flavor. And now I will just take this over to the sink and rinse this out. Or not just rinse it, but you want to wash it. Oh, and when you're doing kombucha, you want to make sure that like your hands are clean and your utensils that you're using are clean. You know, your bottles are clean. You want them clean and sanitized so that no bad bacteria or anything like that gets into your kombucha and ruins it or makes you sick. So I'll take this over there and I'll wash it with some soap and water, and then I will come back for the next part. Okay, so I got my jar cleaned out and I filled it with the water, and I realized earlier in the video I said 14 cups of water. It needs to be 10 cups of water. It's 10 cups plus the 4 cups of tea that makes the 14 cups. So I've got it filled with water, 10 cups of water, and then I will pour my 4 cups of tea into that. And the temperature of your water that you put into your jar determines how hot your tea is that you're going to pour in there. So, like if you just made your tea recently, you'll probably want to fill your jar up with like all cold water, like really cold water. Now, if your tea has had a chance to cool down a bit, which this batch has, because I've already done a batch, of course, and it sat there before, a little bit before I even got started with any of these. So it's cooled down a bit. So I added a little hot water first and then put my cold water on top of that and mixed it around, and then added my warm tea in there. And the more you do it, the more you'll figure out, you know, the temperature and how much hot or cold water you need to put in to balance that out. So, there's my daughter again. Hi, baby. So, now I'll take my thermometer and check the temperature to make sure that it is at a good temperature to add my starter tea and SCOBY. So I just stick it down into the jar in the liquid to check that. Silly. Okay, so it is at 75 degrees, so it is perfect. So we are ready to put in the SCOBY and the starter tea here.
I love SCOBY.
So I will take out my SCOBY.
I love SCOBY.
And pour in my starter tea on top of the water and tea mixture. And then I have a spoon here that I just mix that all around and just get it all stirred together. And then place my SCOBY in the jar.
SCOBYs.
Then put your cover back on and secure it with either a string or a rubber band or whatever you have to hold it in place.
Love you, Mama.
Love you too, baby.
Mama.
Okay, and then just go put it in your dark spot and let it sit for about 7 to 10 days and you're golden. I mean, that's really it. It's really a really easy, simple process. There's not too much to it, and it's not really hard or complicated. I feel like anybody could really do this. I mean, just don't be afraid to try. Just get in there and see what you can do, and just try it. You know, you may find that you really like making it, and it definitely saves us money to make our own kombucha. And I like playing around with flavors and experimenting and seeing what we like and seeing what different flavors we can come up with and stuff. So, I mean, I find it fun too. And it's really a neat science experiment and stuff for the kids too. So they really enjoy kombucha, and they know the process that goes into it and the science behind it and how it all works. So yeah, I hope that this video was educational to you and that you learned something from it, and that you will try your own batch of kombucha. I'm gonna stick this jar into the cabinet and finish my last batch there, and stick all of these jars in for another 3 to 5 days for their second fermentation, and then be good to go. Well, guys, I'm glad that you stopped by to check out this process of how I do kombucha. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope that your kombucha journeys will be just as great as mine is, and I hope you enjoy it as much as we do. Thanks for stopping by, guys, and God bless until next time.